shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, when a 5-year-old child is abused and their attacker is back on the streets before that child has even turned 8, that is not justice. It is a betrayal. In the last year alone, there were an average of 226 cases of child sexual exploitation each and every day. This morning, Labor voted to delay the Coalition's push to crack down on child sex offenders. Why did the Prime Minister instruct his Labor government to vote against the protection of children?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Child sexual abuse is abhorrent and it's totally unacceptable. All children deserve to grow up safely and free from abuse. And I would have thought if there was an issue that should be free from partisan shots, it is that. It is that. For new members of the House, private members' business is dealt with on Monday after it's introduced. Everyone knows that that's the case. It's been the case since at least 1996, since I've been here. People know that that is the case. The government is committed to protecting Australia's children from harm and will always seek to engage.
The Chief Opposition Whip is now warned of all people should not be interjecting on this subject.
And it would be good if there wasn't interjections on this subject, I would have thought. We give credit where credit's due. I give credit to Peter Dutton for the work that he did as Minister in establishing the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation in 2018. This was a critical initiative backed by the then opposition and now supported by the current government. That's the way that we deal with these things. And in 2020, the opposition, then under my leadership, without shots across the chamber, supported the then coalition government in introducing mandatory minimum sentences for the most serious Commonwealth child sex offences and repeat offenders. Those laws from the former government are what remain in place today, after their 9 years in office. My government will continue to enhance Australia's response to child sexual abuse, including through implementing the National Strategy to Prevent and Respond to Child Sexual Abuse and working with states and territories on reforming their working with children's checks. I note that the Shadow Attorney-General has written to the Attorney-General with ideas for further reform, and my government will always consider any sensible proposals for reform. Because as our record makes clear, we're always ready and willing to work constructively in the interests of child safety. Something I think, if we can find one issue in which we can actually work together, I would have thought this was it.
Mate, you could feel the tension in the air before the words even left Sussan Ley's mouth. Parliament was buzzing, cameras were rolling, and every Labor backbencher suddenly looked like they'd swallowed a lemon. Then came that one simple question, a question that cut straight through the spin, the talking points, and the parliamentary puffery, and sent Anthony Albanese's entire front bench scrambling for cover. You could almost hear the panic in the silence that followed. Before we dive into this Albanese meltdown, where one simple question sent Labor into full-blown panic, smash that like button if you're sick of the spin. Subscribe for more truth bombs, and grab the Not Far Right Just Right shirt, links in the description. Because this wasn't just any question. This was a political grenade lobbed straight across the dispatch box by the new opposition leader, Sussan Ley, sharp, steady, and absolutely locked in. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She just let the words hang in the air, like a storm cloud over Labor's moral high ground. Prime Minister, she says, when a 5-year-old child is abused and their attacker is back on the streets before that child has even turned 8, that's not justice. It's a betrayal. Bang. The whole chamber froze. You could see MPs shifting in their seats, trying to look busy with their papers. Ley wasn't done. This morning, Labor voted to delay the coalition's push to crack down on child sex offenders. Why did the Prime Minister instruct his Labor government to vote against the protection of children? Now that's how you open fire in question time. No spin, no waffle, just moral clarity and political precision. And the reaction? Pure chaos. Because you could tell straight away that question landed where it hurt. Anthony Albanese stood up, gave that half-smile politicians do when they're buying time, and muttered the usual thanks to the Speaker. But behind that calm exterior, you could see it, the scramble for an escape route, because the optics here were brutal. Labor, the party that loves to brand itself as the compassionate one, had just voted to delay tougher penalties for the worst kind of criminals imaginable, child abusers. And now the Prime Minister was being asked to explain why. Cue the word salad. Albanese launched into a long, careful speech about how child sexual abuse is a blight and totally unacceptable, which of course, everyone in the room already agreed on. Then came the classic deflection. This shouldn't be about partisan shots. Translation: please stop pointing out what we just did in the Senate. But Ley's question wasn't partisan. It was surgical. Labor did vote to delay the coalition's motion, and now Albo had to explain why. Instead, he went full political yoga, twisting himself into knots about parliamentary procedure. Private members' business is dealt with on Mondays, he said, as if anyone outside Canberra's bubble gives a toss about scheduling rules. You could practically see the staffers backstage face-palming. It was the kind of answer that sounds reasonable to the untrained ear. But to anyone paying attention, it reeked of panic. The Prime Minister wasn't addressing the moral question, just the calendar. As if bureaucracy was the reason child protection laws needed to wait. It was like watching someone try to fight a bushfire with a spray bottle. And here's the thing, Sussan Ley knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just about catching Albo off guard. It was about forcing Labor to face a truth they'd rather bury under committee reports. Because Australians, ordinary mums and dads watching this stuff, don't care what day of the week private members' business happens on. They care that predators are walking free while politicians argue over procedure. The question rattled Labor to its core because it struck at their self-image. They pride themselves on being the moral compass of Australian politics, the protectors of the vulnerable, the defenders of the innocent. But in that moment, when Ley put it to the Prime Minister, all that branding evaporated. They looked like a government ducking responsibility on an issue no Australian can stomach being soft on. And Albo's defence? Well, it was textbook. Praise the opposition leader for something old, cite a bipartisan example, then drown the issue in bureaucracy. He even gave a little shout-out to Peter Dutton, crediting him for establishing the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation back in 2018, which, fair enough, was a solid move. But you could tell he was reaching. It was like saying, hey, we once agreed on something 5 years ago, so stop criticising us now. Then came the self-congratulations. Albanese reminded everyone that under his leadership in 2020, Labor had supported mandatory minimum sentences for serious child sex offences. Great. But that was 5 years ago, mate. The issue on the floor today was why Labor just blocked a move to strengthen those protections further. And instead of answering that, Albo went on about continuing to enhance Australia's response and implementing the national strategy. Classic Canberra filler. By this point, even the Speaker looked like he wanted to skip to the end. You could see it on his face, that look that says, we all know what's happening here. The opposition had drawn blood, and the government was bleeding words trying to patch it up. But what really gave it away was the body language on the Labor benches. Ministers whispering, others staring dead ahead, pretending to read notes. They knew this was bad optics. No matter how Albo spun it, the headline was already written. Labor votes against child protection crackdown. And good luck explaining to the average Aussie voter that it was just a procedural delay. That's the thing about politics. Perception is reality. And when the perception is that you're dragging your feet on protecting kids from predators, no amount of working with states and territories is going to save you. It's a moral issue, not a management one. And Sussan Ley, to her credit, hit that nerve perfectly. Let's be real, Ley's question wasn't just a test for Albanese. It was her coming out moment as opposition leader. She's got that calm, clipped delivery that hides a sting underneath. No shouting, no theatrics, just precision. She framed the issue not as policy, but as principle. This isn't politics, her tone said. This is about right and wrong. That's powerful stuff. Especially when your opponent is up there mumbling about parliamentary scheduling. And that's why it rattled the Labor Party so deeply. Because for all their talk about governing with compassion, They looked heartless and defensive when it counted most. Australians don't forgive that easily. You can mess up an energy policy, stuff up a tax promise, but fail to defend children? That sticks. What makes this whole episode so telling is that Albanese tried to spin it as bipartisanship. He said, "If there's one issue we can actually work together on, it's this," which sounds lovely, except he just voted against doing exactly that. It was like someone slamming the door, then saying, "We should really keep this open." That's the Labor paradox in a nutshell: talk unity, act defensively, and hope no one notices the contradiction. But Sussan Ley noticed. And more importantly, so did the public. Because every mum, dad, and grandparent watching that clip didn't need a policy briefing to understand what just happened. The Prime Minister dodged a moral question, and everyone saw it. You can almost imagine the post-QTD brief in Labor HQ, frantic advisors spinning phrases like procedural technicality and legislative process, while Albo insists they just need to get the messaging right. But the problem isn't messaging, it's priorities. And Ley's question exposed that perfectly. That's the genius of a simple question. It doesn't need to be long or complicated, it just needs to corner the truth. Why did Labor vote against protecting children? There's no easy way out of that. You either admit the mistake or dodge the answer. And Albanese chose the dodge. Which, in politics, is an answer. And look, it's not that Labor doesn't care about child safety, of course they do. But politics is about timing and optics, and they managed to blow both. By delaying the coalition's motion, even for procedural reasons, they handed Ley the moral high ground on a silver platter. She looked decisive, principled, and protective. Albo looked bureaucratic and evasive. It's political theatre 101, and Labor forgot their lines. The irony? Albanese once made a career out of grilling others in question time, fiery, passionate, cutting to the bone. But now, as Prime Minister, he's on the receiving end, and it's not pretty. Watching him stumble through that response felt like watching an old rock star forget the lyrics to his own song. The opposition benches knew it, too. You could hear the smirks in their interjections, the little bursts of laughter when Albo started listing procedures. The Speaker even had to warn the Chief Opposition Whip to keep quiet. That's when you know you've landed a punch, when the other side starts laughing and the Speaker has to play referee. And the best part? Sussan Ley didn't even need to follow up. She let the silence do the damage. Because once that question was out there, it didn't need repeating. Every media outlet, every headline, every political podcast in the country was already on it. One simple question causes panic. That's not just clickbait. That's exactly what happened. Albanese's closing remarks about working together constructively felt like an afterthought, a desperate attempt to patch the wound. But the damage was done. The government looked out of touch. And in the court of public opinion, perception becomes policy. It's moments like these that shift political momentum. You can talk about budgets and reforms all you want, but sometimes it's one flashpoint in Parliament that defines a narrative. For years, Labor's brand has been the party that cares. But in that chamber, on that day, they looked like the party that delayed. Sussan Ley, on the other hand, looked every bit the opposition leader Australia didn't know it needed. Calm but forceful, moral but measured. She didn't grandstand, she just threw a truth bomb and watched the detonation. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that leadership isn't about who shouts loudest. It's about who asks the questions no one wants to answer. And that's why this moment matters. Because when a Prime Minister panics over a simple question, one any Aussie could have asked, it tells you everything about where their priorities lie. Labor can spin, explain, and proceduralise all they want. But the people watching saw it for what it was, a government caught flat-footed on the most unforgivable issue imaginable. So yeah, one simple question did cause panic, not just in Parliament, but in the public conscience. It tore through the facade, exposed the weakness, and gave Australians a rare, unfiltered look at what happens when political comfort collides with moral accountability. And as the dust settles, one thing's clear. This wasn't just another question time clash. It was a turning point, the day the Prime Minister of Australia got cornered not by scandal, not by policy failure, but by the one thing no leader ever wants to face, the truth, asked plainly. Because sometimes all it takes is one simple question to make an entire government lose its composure. So, smash that like button if you reckon Australia deserves better at the top. Subscribe to keep the pollies honest and grab the Not Far Right Just Right shirt, links in the description.